Every week in fantasy football, there's a handful of players that outdo themselves. Players that really didn't have any business scoring as many points as they did, but they still did it nonetheless. We're going to be taking these players and selling high on them here in week 3, talking through why situations unfolded as such and how to capitalize on these outcomes here for this week's action. Maybe these players have some legitimate lineup value, but at the end of the day, they still did things that we don't expect from them in, the rest of the scope of this fantasy season. Maybe it was a one-time occurrence, a one-time performance that just isn't replicatable here. We've got to take advantage of that. We've got to at least try to make a move here, toss out some offers, and see what can be made of those situations taking place. So if you're new around here, drop on down, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on as well so you can get on my videos as quickly as possible and get your questions answered. The comment section is always open here at SFS, and I'm looking to be interactive and help you guys crush your leagues this season. Of course, help each other out as well. If you think that you can answer a question that another community member has, and you've got a good feel for what they're asking, of course, you're welcome to give your 2 cents on that situation as well. So we're diving in here. Let's jump to my first must-sell wideout here for week 3. Boom, here we go. Let's get started. So I'm going to kick off today's episode talking some Amari Cooper. Now, some of you guys aren't going to like this take. There is the opportunity to be very patient with Amari Cooper and just hope that you can wait until Deshaun Watson returns. But there might just be, and there will be, some other opportunities down the road for those of you currently not in the Amari Cooper market right now to buy cheap for some shares later on in the season as that date approaches. But as we stand here approaching week 3 fantasy football with Jakobi Brissett being the incumbent starter here entering into this next week's games, I am selling high on the big-time performance that Cooper just delivered for us in week 2. 9 receptions on 10 targets, catching 90% of his available opportunities for a $101 and a receiving touchdown. Of course, I love Amari Cooper as a player. I talked through this offseason prior to the Deshaun Watson suspension and that known amount of games that we were going to be experiencing here. I thought he was a steal of the draft in the 5th round. However, that took a far shift for the worst when we've now got, an 11-12 game suspension tagged on him. So that changes things a bit here. As long as Jakobi Brissett is the quarterback for at least 4+ games remaining on the schedule, I don't want any business with Amari Cooper or having him in my starting lineup. The reasoning and my, explanation for how he came about these great numbers are very simple. The New York Jets secondary played a dang good game with the exception of letting up a couple of blown coverages downfield due to some insufficient safety play. They played very good against Baltimore in week 1. They didn't have too many schematic lapses. They didn't really have guys truly getting burnt downfield. They held them to a respectable game. It was, Rashod Bateman and Devin Duvernay finding the end zone multiple times. That's how they came about their points here. For Amari Cooper, he was having himself a nice game, but Sauce Gardner gets injured in this contest, and then he just continued to have an all-out spectacular performance and took these guys in the back end of the Jets secondary to church here and taught them a lesson about receivers and obviously what pristine route running can do in the National Football League. So he had himself a great game. The Jets, of course, ended up winning that game in what was hilarious fashion here. But at the end of the day, I do not expect consistency of all things from Amari Cooper, a guy who, even in the best of situations, as a Dallas Cowboy back in 2018, had his concerns and troubles with consistent play and production. So again, Amari Cooper, the player, the route runner, the vertical weapon is phenomenal. But do I trust, this is week 3 here, so if we're talking about making our way to week 12 with Jakobi Brissett, 9 more games of this, I'm not buying in here. You've got 1 terrible game, 1 great game. Let's find some middle ground here. Sell them high for somebody else that might have had a down week and has a better week-to-week outlook here. And like I said, for those of you that don't have any shares of Amari Cooper, maybe as we get closer to that Deshaun Watson suspension date, you can maybe scoop up a couple of shares or at the trade deadline, something like that. But for now, we've got ourselves an issue with this week-to-week outlook with the Browns quarterbacking situation. Tyler Lockett, guess who? I've had him as a sit candidate the last 2 weeks here. He is just plain and simple with Russell Wilson, the last however many years they played together, a streaky and unreliable wide receiver who has an exceptionally awesome ceiling. And what he is with Geno Smith is even more of that. This is a player that I expect to have even more sporadic and inconsistent production in play here, despite the fact that he's an awesome vertical weapon and a guy that can be a really great route runner at times. But he loses that chemistry with Russ. He comes in here into a terrible game script in this game, and yes, those will be a frequent occurrence here for Lockett, but with Lockett's production, even with Russell Wilson, even in the bad matchups, like in terms of having a difficult opponent in terms of their secondary play, it was hard to predict even then. He could go out there and have one of his best games of his season or his career playing against some of the stiffest competition just because of that chemistry and connection that him and Russ had. With Geno Smith, I don't trust him to do that. This is a fairly respectable San Francisco 49ers back end. This past week, he went 9 receptions on 11 targets, but again, I am selling here. I'm looking for that rookie wide receiver that hasn't broke out yet. Maybe, someone's willing to offer you a Garrett Wilson, where yes, there is quite a big differential in terms of Garrett Wilson's point productions from this past week in terms of, comparing that to Tyler Lockett, but maybe that player's trying to sell high in Garrett Wilson. You can get yourself a rookie for veteran deal there. There are other opportunities on the table, maybe a guy like a Brandon Cooks who had himself a down week here that I would much rather invest myself into because I have a higher confidence in the week-to-week turnover in terms of fantasy points that I'll be getting from this position on a week-to-week basis. So sell high on Tyler Lockett here in week 3. Rashod Bateman, another player. I'll be honest, and I'm going to preface this at the start of the take here because I think some people might be frustrated with this. I hear you typing, and I'm apologizing right now. I love Rashod Bateman, the player. I absolutely think he is one of the best upcoming young wide receivers in this game. But there's one thing that through 2 weeks here, and yes, it is just 2 weeks, so if you want to bash me about that in the comment section, have at it. But the constant that I'm seeing here that I can't get past is the fact that he is clearly unarguably the second best pass catching threat in this offense on any given week in one of the more unique NFL offenses in the entire league. You've got a situation here in Baltimore where this team, if they're primed in a position, and I think that especially when J.K. Dobbins comes back here, you're going to see actual running backs getting attempts here instead of Lamar Jackson just cruising through to the team lead in rush yards. But for Rashod Bateman, a guy who was out-targeted by Mark Andrews both weeks so far this season, and you expect that to be the norm here going forward, that establishes a hard ceiling. And yes, he balled out this week, and he is very capable of doing that. But you've had 2 games in a row here, a 2-reception performance in week 1, a 4-reception performance in week 2, where if you're not getting that huge play, you're not getting the production you're looking for. And you can make that argument for a lot of players, but especially in this Ravens situation, that is something I feel to be even more troublesome and worrisome. He's a dog. He can go out there. The touchdowns he created were yards after the catch. He was out-racing people, showing me speed that was better than I anticipated even coming out of college. He was one of my favorite prospects in that entire draft class. But again, he was out-targeted, 12 targets here through 2 weeks, averaging 6 targets per game to Mark Andrews, who has 18 targets through the same amount of games, so 3 more targets per game. The other concerning and troubling thing here is the dependency on tight ends for this Ravens offense. Now, you might be saying, yeah, Isaiah Likely is not competing for Rashod Bateman's targets. That is true, but you've got guys coming out here competing with him for snaps. I will not argue or make the argument that he is anything other than this team's wide receiver 1 this season. But he's only playing 60 or so % of snaps here. 61% this past week, 66% week 1. Those numbers are fine, but they are much better with other players in other situations with guys normally putting up 80+% snap share games and that being a regular occurrence. You're talking about guys like Michael Thomas on a pitch count in week 1 playing 61%, and we kind of looked down upon that and said, hey, it can only get better from here. With Bateman doing this in back-to-back games, again, as this team's firm wide receiver 1, but again, second best pass-catching asset, it gives me some worry and some trouble. So I'm about to make a comparison here. Do not take this out of context. I'm going to compare Rashod Bateman this season to DK Metcalf with Russell Wilson. What do I mean by that? What is my explanation for that comp? DK was someone that was asked, an extremely talented player, to be very, very efficient and convert the looks he gets into big plays and touchdowns. DK was more than capable of making that stuff happen, but it resulted in some inconsistent play for him because if he didn't cash in on those vertical looks or make something spectacular happen after the catch and he only gets 6 targets in a given week, you're going to have frequent flops. So we haven't seen either game turn into a flop yet here. He's created 2 long touchdowns in 2 weeks played here, but I promise you he's not going to do that for 17 weeks straight. So take the high value while it's there. I would sell him for Christian Kirk right now. If you offer me a deal with Christian Kirk on the table for Rashod Bateman, that is something, the volume that Kirk is receiving, the way he's balling out, his usage is fantastic. I'm taking that offer. I'm running with it here, and I'm moving on to week 3. Jakobi Meyers, another name. You're not going to sell this guy for a blue chip player, but I think he essentially had what I estimate to be his fantasy football ceiling or close to it. A guy who had a 35% target share here, and I might add is a very nice PPR flex play. But again, I think about capped out his value here for week 2 at 13 targets, 9 receptions, and 95 yards, so nearly getting to the century mark through the air. Like I said, you're not really selling him for something super, super valuable, but what you might be able to do is go make an offer for a Chris Olave, a guy who had 300 air yards this week on 13 targets. If he starts cashing in those vertical opportunities, he'll be doing some big things for that offense. Maybe you go out and trade for a guy like a Curtis Samuel who's been balling out in the slot, leading the team in targets for the Commanders the last couple of weeks. It's all about framing this and putting it in perspective. Who are we trading for? Who are we getting in return? All that stuff. And that is something that has to stay ever so present in your minds here when I bring up this next player, because I think there's going to be some mass pandemonium. You're going to, think the purge is going on, and there's going to be some chaos down in the comment section. So for those of you guys, I hear, your fingers typing away. I know that they're still, dirty and full of pizza and Cheetos because you haven't washed them since Sunday afternoon's games. But here it is, our final must-sell player here for week 3, wide receiver positions. It's Jaylen Waddle. Oh my God, I had him as a must-sell last week, and guess what? I was wrong. I was a week early, and if you're going to sit down there, Jimmy, I know it's you, and you're going to try and tell me, hey, why'd you make me sell him? Could you have predicted, Jimmy, that he was going to go for 19 targets and 11 receptions for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns? I don't think so. The Baltimore Ravens secondary had some extreme mental lapses this past week, and I'm not going to sit back here and pretend. I said this last week in the sell video. I'm not arguing that Jaylen Waddle is a top 10 NFL wide receiver every single time he lines up to take a snap for this Dolphins offense. But what I don't is trust him to be a consistent lineup producer. Now, again, was I wrong about that? I think the jury is still out on that. And maybe you think I'm absolutely crazy, which again, I hear you typing away telling me I'm a complete goon here. But for 2 seconds, pause before you hit send and listen to what I'm going to say here. Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill just put up the 2 single-handed best fantasy wide receiver weeks of anyone out there this week. Do you know who had down weeks? Jamar Chase and Devontae Adams. And maybe there's someone else that you got your eye on that you could buy low for. Take this monster game, which is a one-time anomaly. I promise you, if you are crazy enough to think this is going to happen again, it will not. If you think the Dolphins are going to outscore a team 28-3 through the air in the 4th quarter of another game this season, you're out of your damn mind. The Dolphins have an explosive passing attack. They have the best 2-man wide receiver combo in the entire league. And as I said, the Dolphins wide receiver core, these 2 players in a vacuum, having both of them, are both top 6 to 8 players every time they line up to take the field. But you cannot expect 19 targets to consistently head to a player. They had the negative game script of all negative game scripts and somehow managed to come back. I'm not saying the plays he made were not spectacular. Both touchdowns were quite a high level of difficulty. He went up and had maybe the catch of the year so far. It was a touchdown, unlike Deontay Johnson's sideline grab, which was just a first down. He goes up and mosses a player for the game-winning score. He also has a screen pass, which he weaved in and out of blockers and scored, again, a very impressive run-after-catch receiving touchdown. Again, I'm not disputing the fact that I was wrong last week. I was a week early, clearly, in terms of his production. We saw positive things this week. He frickin' balled out. But at least entertain me here. We're not selling Jaylen Waddle for a guy, at this point, we're not selling Jaylen Waddle for a guy like Michael Pittman. We're not selling him for a guy like Courtland Sutton. Those players are out of the discussion now. There is no reason to sell him for that price because, as I said, I'll say it a million more times because I'm transparent with you guys and I'm not going to just sit back here and ride my high horse and act like I can't be wrong on occasion. I was wrong. Sell him or at least try to make an offer for one of those tier 1A or 1B players that you can get in return because you're not going to be passing at this high of a level late in the game with this much urgency. Tyreek Hill's probably not going to leave a game with cramps again. He did come back and freaking dominate instantly with multiple, were they both 50-plus yard touchdown receptions? One might have been like 48 yards. It's just not repeatable. And that's something that a lot of us have to understand here. While Jaylen Waddle is an absolute monster, I wish I had him on my team, my NFL team. I guess last week I would have wished I had him on my fantasy team too. I do not expect this to be a regularity, and that is why he makes the video again for this week. So if you want to lay it on me in the comment section below, so be it. But at least just try to do something positive for your fantasy squad here, because nearly 20 targets in a game happens about, as often as we see something else that's just insanely irregular, like Jonas Gray's come off the waiver wire and have 200 rushing yard performances and 4 rushing touchdowns. Like, it's just not a norm for fantasy football, and I think a lot of you don't realize that yet. So hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully you guys are able to go out there and sell them high for one of those top 4 dogs. Maybe you could sell them if I'm actually recording this video before Monday Night Football, before the Bills game kicks off. Maybe you can sell them for Stephon Diggs if he has a down game or something, but I'm not expecting that to be the case because Gabe Davis is out. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode. Let me know your thoughts on today's video. Let me know your trade conversations, your questions, all that great stuff in the comment section below. I'm happy to help you guys. Hopefully we don't completely miss the ball again this week. Like I said, I apologize for those of you that traded Jaylen Waddle last week, but at the end of the day, you're the guys pressing the send button on those trade deals and having the choice to make those decisions for your own team. So I'll bite the bullet on the Jaylen Waddle take from last week. I've got a new revamped take here for week 3, and hopefully you guys can appreciate that, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.